The coronavirus pandemic triggered a global anxiety that led to the rise of self-medication as people sought for protection against contracting the disease. Self-medication is a major contributor to human pathogenic resistance to medication, and especially to antibiotics. This has resulted in misdiagnosis, delays in appropriate treatment, pathogen resistance, and increased morbidity across many parts of the continent. And I can bet you have a relative or a friend who self-medicates. So let's talk about self-medication. Have you self-medicated?
As a clinician, sometimes I feel I am aware of what is happening to me and feel confident to self-medicate. So yes, I have self-medicated.
Yes, I have self-medicated before.
Right, my guests on the program tonight, Dr. Nancy Kunyeha, a diabetes specialist at the Aga Khan University Hospital in Nairobi, and Anita Asamoah, a public health expert and researcher from Accra in Ghana. With guests like these, it's bound to be insightful. Let's get connected. Hello there, and welcome to Kenya Connect from the BBC and KTN News, connecting Kenya to the world and the world to Kenya. My name is Victor Muyakane. So let's set the context by looking at the prevalence rates for self-medication. Apparently, these numbers are quite serious. They're up to 68% in European countries, while much higher in developing countries. For example, they go as high as 92% in the adolescents of Kuwait. In sub-Saharan Africa, the existing data on overall self-medication rates varies from as little as 11.9% to 75.7%. Ailments treated by self-medication tend to be around these three main symptoms, which is respiratory diseases or symptoms at 50%, fevers at 47%, and gastrointestinal problems at 45%. Where do these drugs come from? Well, the major sources for antimicrobials included pharmacies at 65.5%, leftover drugs at 50%, and general shops or stores at 37.5%. Furthermore, global research spanning about 50 countries reveals that 95% of respondents were open to taking medicines for self-treating of minor ailments. This is according to Dr. Fred Sioi, the Deputy Registrar at the Pharmacy and Poisons Board in Kenya. Now, to our guests tonight, I have a question. When you hear numbers like these, what response comes to mind? Let's start with you, Nancy.
A number of things come to mind. Individuals will seek self-medication for various reasons. One is the capacity for access to care. So if it's difficult to access a doctor or someone who'll be able to give medication, I think a lot of people find it easier to just go to a chemist and pick up medications. The second thing is the cost. The cost of access to care is limiting, and it's one less expense to go to a chemist and get over-the-counter drugs. And finally, I see it as a wider healthcare system in terms of where people are able to access medications when they feel unwell.
Let's talk about these health systems gaps. But before that, Anita, what's your response when you see these numbers? What comes to mind? What's your reaction to this?
So what comes to my mind as a person or as an individual is antimicrobial resistance. And just like you said, the prevalence is so high. And the last research we did here, it was 86%, which is quite high above the WHO limit that they set. Yeah.
Right. So clearly it's a worrying state of affairs. And still with you, Anita, could you please paint the picture for us? What does it look like in Ghana when it comes to self-medication? What are the trends? What are people doing there?
Ghana here, a lot of people self-medicate. When COVID started with the pandemic, a lot of people were secretly buying antibiotics and taking them because they didn't want to go for a test so that maybe they wouldn't be isolated. You see, which was a very wrong move. So at the end of the day, by the time you even get the COVID, you've ingested a whole lot of poison into your system. You get it. So it is totally wrong, and they've been doing it not now. I mean, before, and now it's still on the rise.
This is going to be a very silly question, but would you please talk to us, why do we need a prescription? Why is it important for us to take the medicine as prescribed by someone like you?
I don't think it's a silly question. And I think it begs the need for people to understand why we take medications. Medications are they're foreign substances to the body, even when they're made from plant or herbal-based and they've been tested. It's something new into your body. And just the whole process of making medications and all the inserts and pamphlets we have, educate us about potential side effects. Each individual has varying responses to various medications. So I will take one medication, you may take another, and we don't get the same side effects. So I think it's important that we understand that when we take medications, we need to know that they have actions on our bodies. Our bodies may respond in ways that could be good or negative in terms of side effects. And when you're taking more than one medication, you also need to think about drug interactions and what they do. So whenever we take medications without guidance, there is the chance of taking too much, too little, which would lead to the resistance we are talking about, too much that may lead to complications and organ damage potentially, and drug interactions that sometimes, unfortunately, are even fatal in the long run.
But let's shift gears a little bit. Since the discovery of penicillin in 1928, antibiotics have revolutionized the way infections are treated. But in recent years, a worrying phenomenon has emerged, which our guests have spoken about. Some bacteria are developing a resistance to antibiotics, as some of the medication no longer works. More worrying still is that misuse of antibiotics is accelerating this process. The World Health Organization says that it is now one of the biggest threats to global health, as one of our guests also alluded to. The BBC's Rhoda Odhiambo investigates.
When you have an infection, doctors would prescribe antibiotics. You should feel better after a couple of days. But for many, these drugs are no longer working, and some people have actually died. One of the worst affected countries is Malawi. I'm heading there to see why these drugs are ineffective and their impact on Malawians. This is Blazer, who is 8 years old. He would like to play with his new friends, but he can't. Blazer was attacked by a crocodile while fishing.
I pushed the stick that I was holding inside the crocodile's mouth. I kept hitting it, and eventually it let go of my leg and went back into the water.
Although Blazer won the fight against the crocodile, he's in danger of losing his leg, which has been infected by a defiant bacterium.
Blazer has a very rare bacteria called Acinetobacter. It's quite resistant to almost all the antibiotics that we have here.
At the hospital lab, technicians continue to examine Blazer's samples. They are trying to find an antibiotic that will kill the bug on his wound. But none of these tests on Blazer's samples have been successful. Meropenem is the most powerful antibiotic in Malawi. Doctors here call it the last line of defense. It's only used when all other antibiotics in the hospital have failed, and it's worrying that the bugs emerging here cannot be killed by it. Close to 1,500 patients are admitted at Kamuzu Central Hospital, all under the care of just a few doctors. Across the hospital in a female ward, 19-year-old Mfatso Jali nurses the only child she will ever have. After giving birth here at the hospital, she developed a bacterial infection that couldn't be cured with standard antibiotics. The only way to save her life was to remove her womb. The operation not only scarred Mfatso's body, it tormented her emotionally.
My husband and I are very young, and I'm afraid that he might leave me to make a baby elsewhere.
It's against the law for pharmacies in Malawi to sell antibiotics without a prescription. But I've been told some pharmacists focus on the money and not the law. We head out to see if we can actually buy antibiotics without a prescription here in Lilongwe. So the first pharmacy we visited, I managed to buy this, Malawi's last line of antibiotics. The person leading the government's campaign for proper use of antibiotics is Dr. Watipaso Kasambara.
What drug would shock you if I bought it?
Ciprofloxacin.
I got something.
What?
Yes.
Did you get without a prescription?
Without a prescription. I was given on the dispensing counter written prescription. Written prescription.
The act is so vague that it doesn't prosecute people who are selling things like this. It is so bad, it is so wrong. And you know, those pharmacy guys, they know. Money being, yes, we need money at the end of the day, but look at people's lives. You can't just get this drug, sell it without a prescription.
I need your impressions on this piece. Anita, what are you feeling when you look at a piece like this?
I'm opening my mouth, actually. I'm wowing here. Like, I'm really surprised because that is, I think, that should be in the, is it at watch category or the reserve group of antibiotics? You know, in antibiotics, we have groups. We have categories, rather. We have the access group, we have the watch group, and we have the reserve group. So for that person to have access to that category of antibiotics she went to buy, then that means all these are what is fueling the antimicrobial resistance. Like, I'm shocked. So what laws are in place? Do you see it? Our logistics, we have a whole lot of issues with our system, our health system. You get it? So you can't even trace where this particular antibiotics is.
I think I feel both anger, disappointment, and a sense of it raises a question as to where we have failed as a healthcare system, as a practitioner. And I see two tiers of challenges there. There's the regulatory, to think through what is happening with regulatory structures. And these would be nationwide and also as medications come down to the public. And then there's public awareness. I see the lack of the public understanding that taking medications like this will be catastrophic, not just to the individual, but to whole societies.
And still with you, Nancy, could you please give us some insight into why antibiotics in particular are abused to this level?
I think for two reasons. One is we always, or many times, do not understand what is causing the symptoms we feel. So as my colleague Anita says, someone gets a fever, and not all fevers are caused by bacteria. So a lot of viral illnesses that we get, our own bodies will be able to fight off. They do last a bit longer, maybe 7 days even, but the body should be able to fight off those infections and they clear. So the rush to take away our symptoms, get the comfort without evidence of what we are treating is one of the major reasons that we are misusing antibiotics. And I think second is just a lack of understanding that antibiotics are not, it's not water. It's not, it's not something we are drinking that is harmless.
Do you have any idea of any areas within East Africa or Kenya where the resistance has gone up because of abuse of antibiotics?
I won't talk about specific areas, but if you look at the critical care facilities, like the ICUs and where we have long stay patients and surgical units, that's where we tend to see a lot of drug-resistant organisms. Day to day in my practice, I work with diabetes, and so we see people with foot infections, for instance. many individuals will have taken 2 to 3 forms of antibiotics and medications many times before presenting to a hospital facility. And this fuels that whole process. And it means when your infection worsens, the capacity to get these drug-resistant organisms and to spread them within the hospitals is much larger.
Clearly, grim state of affairs right here. But I think this is time for a quick break. When we return, we will connect you to some personal experiences of some people who are self-medicating. Do not go too far. Kenya Connect will be back in a moment. Welcome back to Kenya Connects from the BBC and KTN News, connecting Kenya to the world and the world to Kenya. Now, why would some people prefer not to go to hospital and instead treat their own ailments? We asked this to some residents in Nairobi, and here are some of their personal stories.
Whenever my blood pressure is high, I feel like I have a lot of headache from the front of my head. And this has prompted me to always seek for paracetamols, yeah? Because if you don't go for them, that persistent pain on my head, yeah, will make me not do any other thing. If you want to go straight on first the medical treatment proper, it is a lot of money. And this is a lot of money, sometimes you don't have it.
Nancy, is there such a thing as safe self-medication?
You can only self-medicate safely with guidance from a healthcare practitioner and the person who has given you that advice, who has hopefully examined you and understands the medical condition that you're taking medication for, and also with a bit of education. I'll just share that in like diabetes treatment, part of it is education, and we do engage individuals and hopefully get them to understand their medications, understand the side effects, understand the timing of medications. And so like with medications like insulin, you can learn to safely adjust them. But I say that with a caveat because you still need intermittent care and follow-up.
Why aren't people getting the message that self-medication is wrong? Why aren't they getting the message?
They are getting the message, not all, maybe not everybody, they are getting it. But then the options they have, what options do they have? You get it? So for me, I wouldn't say that when you self-medicate in a case of emergency, I wouldn't say it is wrong, because it could be life-saving, but not antibiotics.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, we sought to find out the extent of the problem of self-medication and what African governments are doing to curb it. We spoke to journalists in Kenya, Rwanda, and Nigeria, and here's what they had to say.
Self-medication is endemic in Nigeria. Over-the-counter drugs like antimalarials and painkillers are the most abused. However, the government only clamps down on pharmacies that sell unprescribed drugs to customers. Exact data on exactly what the government is doing about this is scarce, but the penalties range from fines to revocation of licenses. But that's usually on the extreme end of things.
So self-medication in Kenya is a big problem. Unfortunately, without accurate data, we cannot tell the extent. However, you can tell from the evidence of antimicrobial resistance and the development of superbugs that people are really medicating themselves, particularly with antibiotics. When antibiotics can no longer work for infections, it's just a symptom of a much larger problem.
Right. Any takeaways from these sentiments from different parts of the continent, Anita?
Yeah. First of all, the lady was saying that for the first thing she would do is Google, and that is what most people do now. They use Dr. Google. Everybody Googles the symptoms now and just go and buy the medication, which is very wrong. So she's being truthful, but it is a wrong move.
Your impressions, Nancy, when you see the sentiments that you just saw, what comes to mind?
One, that it's, I think both the citizen and the government need to be responsible about medications. So there is my responsibility also as a citizen of Kenya and the nations. I think on awareness, like Anita has said, one of the strategies that can be used at TV, radio in Kenya, we have vernacular stations where the reach has been quite good with doctors speaking into common mispractices or malpractices that have really educated people at the grassroots level. So I think those are tangible solutions that should be encouraged. The second is that we have access issues. Just remember, like in our country, we still don't have enough healthcare practitioners across the board. So we need to think about healthcare delivery from training, clinical officers, medical officers, and not just the specialists, because they will not be enough right now to cover the entire country. So access is a challenge of the healthcare provider, but costs and economics, I think, play a big part, like the lady said, as to health-seeking behavior. So we need to think, how do we make healthcare more affordable to the citizens of our countries?
At this point, I'd like to ask you, and I'll start with you, Nancy. What have you connected with the most throughout this program?
I work in chronic care, and I am aware that sometimes you're juggling between providing medications, coming to see a doctor, and how you will sustain that treatment through the year. And many times patients opt to have 2 consultations, for instance, so that they can save enough money for the medications. So I understand the challenge to the individual patient, but I want to say here, remember, it's not just about the prescribed medications, it's also the re-picking of prescriptions, which is also very dangerous. So sometimes we see individuals who have not been seen for 3 years and they're using the same medications without a single blood test to confirm that your health status was the same in 2018 as in 2021. So the refilling of prescriptions, just because we've not talked about it here, is really a bad practice.
Thank you for that. Anita, what have you connected with the most in this program?
So for me, I realized the challenge of the ordinary person at the grassroots, because we have, people have financial issues, and our system too isn't helping. There are no jobs, so a whole lot of people are unemployed. You have to cater for your aged parents and a whole lot of issues. Going to the lab to run a test so that you would ascertain the exact bacteria or symptom that is worrying you is expensive, and these are not covered on the NHIS. So I understand the plight of the common man. So we just implore, like for myself, I would just implore my government, that's the Ghana government, to include more tests on the NHIS as free, or maybe at a very reduced price.
Now here's what else you need to know from across the world in just 60 seconds. And we start off with tomato growers in northern Spain who are battling it out to win the cherished Ugliest Tomato Award. It has become a tradition in the village of Tudela, with dozens of entries for the contest and the winner taking home Iberian ham. Now you know where to take those ugly tomatoes from your garden. Goodness gracious. And it was a surfing contest at the Imperial Beach in California, but not the kind that you'd expect, because this one is for dogs. And the question on everyone's mind was, who would come out top dog? The beach was the setting for the third annual Surf Dog competition, where 60 dogs were competing for the prestigious Pooch Prize. Now, this is not just a volcano erupting, it's also a place to have a barbecue party and grill hot dogs. Scientists used the lava from this Icelandic volcano to cook their lunch while they studied its eruption. Talk about living on the edge or eating where you work. Well, that's all we had time for tonight on Kenya Connect from the BBC and KTN News. I've been your host, Victor Moyakane, and until next time, it's goodbye from now.